You're listening to Midtown Radio. This is Danielle DeVoe, and I am here talking with Brock Hart from Overlap Associates, a local design firm. And welcome to Midtown Radio, Brock.
Thank you.
It's your Midtown Radio debut, but we've.
It is.
So I was interested in talking to you because you, like a number of employers, suddenly have your entire workforce not at work every day, and you're. On the one hand, there's sort of this interesting group of organizations where people can still do their jobs to some extent from home. There are people who are not that fortunate where their job is just gone right now when people can't leave their house. But in certain instances where, and for listeners, because I'm working from home, my daughter is here, so there may be disruptions. Just little color to the interview. But when it is possible in theory to do your job from home, but of course also as a design firm, a lot of your work is traveling around meeting with clients, and you have clients all across the country and all over the world. So as well as a site in Leeds in England, you have a sort of a satellite office. So what was that experience like all of a sudden? There was 1 week you were at work and then 1 week no one's allowed to go to work. So what did that look like in your organization?
So I think, it's wild in that so much of the work is workshop based, getting people together, using sticky notes and markers and drawing stuff, and our office is all whiteboards all over the walls, and so it's a very tactile and visual work that we do to do this kind of design work that we do. But interestingly, increasingly we were being asked to do this work virtually or remote anyway, because of environmental concerns with flying people all over the place, or just the challenges of working in a place as big as Canada and trying to work with people all across the province of Ontario. It's not realistic to bring everyone together all the time. So luckily for us, we had already been doing this kind of work remotely. What's been interesting actually about suddenly everyone being thrown into it is everyone's willing to try now. So even though we could do workshops virtually before with virtual sticky notes or online collaboration spaces, things like Zoom and all of this stuff existed, people were really resistant to doing it because they couldn't imagine that they could. And then suddenly we all had to, and we all had to like that. And so everyone's like, I can still do my stuff. We can still do the work that we need to do. And we're like, yeah, you can. It's going to be different, but we can still accomplish it. And so that very first week that we all had to work at home, we were meant to be doing a 2-day conference for 100 people. It was a futures-oriented foresight event in Alberta. And the organizers were like, what the hell are we going to do? No one can travel. And we said, well, we just make it virtual. And so we were able to pivot it into smaller events that are happening on a weekly basis to deliver the same content. It's a different kind of experience, but it's still happening. So I think for us, we were lucky, maybe because we do work all over the world. We already all have laptops. So we have digital communication figured out for ourselves. So it wasn't actually that hard to do the transition, actually.
Yeah, well, in your organization, of course, being a design thinking firm, you use agile methods. And so, if you hadn't been able to demonstrate that agility, it would be ironic.
Yeah.
And this is sort of one of the things that I find very interesting is that, a lot of organizations, when pushed, suddenly found that they could do things. And there are a lot of ways that we organize where people have been resistant to that change. And so in the post-secondary education world, for example, a lot of students and faculty with disabilities are now very frustrated because many of the accommodations that they had asked for in terms of not having to come in if there's a snowstorm because they know the sidewalks won't be shoveled and they know it will be impossible, and having pushback from institutions saying, well, it just isn't possible for us to let you do that, when all of a sudden, when push came to shove, overnight it became possible for everybody in the organization to continue doing their job even without coming in. So that these accommodations that people with disabilities wanted are suddenly not as difficult to enable as everyone had claimed previously, when it would have been inconvenient to do it. And so I think that's really exciting, the way that some of that work-life balance could be renegotiated right now because of the possibilities of not always having to be physically present in a space. And certainly, your firm was a bit easier for you because your firm was already doing things like that in the first place. But then we also have the flip side, where there's a lot of organizations that are demonstrating a lack of agility. And so to me, when I was looking at some of the manufacturing personal protective equipment for medical workers, and seeing that there are increasingly these contracts being created for the manufacturing of these specific types of clothing and protective gear, but the projection for those being made is sort of midsummer or late summer. And it seems preposterous to me that in an emergency, which it is an emergency, cities have declared emergencies, provinces have declared emergencies, that organizations aren't able to move more quickly than that. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about where you've seen barriers to agility in some of the organizations that you work with, and what we're seeing now.
Yeah, I think forest fires, viruses, these are all things that are exponential, and our means for fighting them are extremely linear. So the virus infects so many more people than we can possibly make things, because we can't exponentially make this equipment. And so we're not complex capable at all. And even though we can see these things coming, we're still bad at just thinking about ways to actually deal with these problems when they manifest themselves. And I think it's been so unbelievable that this happened as quickly as it did. And the scale that it's affected everything has been wild. And it's been really interesting to watch how hard it is for a variety of organizations. And it is often bigger. I mean, we're a boutique firm, so it should be dead easy for us, and it has been pretty easy for us to pivot. Big organizations, by their very nature, are designed to prevent new things from happening. That's what a bureaucracy is, right? It's entrenching known knowledge about what works, and we protect that stuff, and it is designed to stop anything new from happening or making its way in. And so when you suddenly have to change incredibly quickly, it's the wrong design. They're not set up to do it at all. And I think we're watching that happen in real time, and it's unfortunate, so quite frankly. Because we need these things to be able to work faster than they do, but you need a different design for the organization. And even things like, I mean, because we're trying to save pennies, we don't give people laptops. So then people suddenly need to work from home, and they're not set up to work from home. We all need internet at home for this all to work. And we're constantly, as we're all trying to have these video calls now at home, if you've got two people in the home that are both using the same internet, sometimes that's not work. And maybe you've got kids who are also now trying to learn online at home on broadband internet that's not actually set up for commercial purposes. It's a shitty experience sometimes. And so again, we're not really set up for this stuff, but we could be. And I mean, and kind of to your point about suddenly these things that we thought were impossible, suddenly we can make happen. Well, that was always true. I mean, even things like the reduction in carbon emissions suddenly, and how we might actually hit our goals. And it was like, oh, so that was just will. Like, we all just had to try a little bit for a couple of weeks, I guess. And that all got a bit better. So again, I think a lot of it just comes back to us not being complex capable, because it's hard. And it's not how we think.
Yeah, I like that you made the reference to your kids' e-learning. I would have said the e-babysitters on because my kids are learning about animals by watching Netflix shows about
Mhm.
animals, which would be like, when you have to work and your partner has to work and you have two kids who need to be entertained somehow,
Yeah.
I mean, that's challenging. And I there's also sort of something that overlap I know does really well in terms of understanding that people have families and sometimes your families have needs. If you have young children and they can't go to school or they can't go to daycare, they have to be somewhere. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how organizations can find that balance. So um, we've talked about this a lot in my home where we're both expected to have work days, but we obviously can't both have 8-hour work days during the 8-hour work day because we're trading off children. And in the first kind of couple weeks, we did see that when an organization suddenly has everyone working from home, people were initially joking, oh, well, I guess we're going to find out which meetings could have been emails after all. Except that, no, we didn't, because people just made Zoom meetings for things that they like, just as a demonstration of presence. Like, it's important for us to all be seen in the same room, having a meeting so that we know that people are still working. And with the really an understanding that people don't have 9 to 5 work days if they have two children in the home. Your work day is being patched together in a very different way. And so how do, first of all, as someone who is running a company and you obviously have work to do, and you have a partner who also has work to do, how are you managing that in your home? And then how are you sort of helping your organization manage that?
Yeah, so we always, again, like we always had flexible work hours for our staff. We've just never been a workplace that needs people to be there from 9 to 5 and be at your desk or any of that sort of stuff. So again, that's already in our culture to have that flexibility. But I actually think that one of the things, like, the transition has been fine to go from we work out of a studio or in our clients' offices to we all work at home. At the same time, I mean, it's incredibly stressful because you don't know if your business can survive. So there's a lot of stuff that we do that people need and are asking us to help them with right now, which is fantastic. But it's happening to everybody. So it's kind of like, you know, what businesses get shut down by the government, and were any of those my clients, and suddenly is my work gone, not because we can't help them, but because they either aren't operating or something has happened to them where now they no longer have the same budget. So everyone's super stressed. And now we're all super stressed and we're working from home and we're not seeing each other. And a bunch of us have kids and families and partners that are also working and all of these things. And I think I think unless you're really intentional about giving people space to be flexible, so that they know they can take it, that productivity is not about I did 8 hours of work today, but I got the work done that I had to get done today. And I actually also took care of my family. And I took care of myself because this is so stressful. Like we have to find balance in all of this to get through it. And because we haven't experienced anything like this before. Again, at the scale of this, and so you know, I think what's really nice about things like Zoom meetings, like I love that we're not doing conference calls. We're not doing conference calls anyway. And increasingly, I'm not having any meetings that are phone calls anymore. We're all just video calling now. And it's lovely because we see each other. And that's a way better experience than being on a conference call. So for us, we have a daily stand-up meeting that we do now, where it's 20 minutes. It's 9:30 in the morning. Every single overlapper joins, and for 20 minutes we all see each other, and that might be the only point in the day where you have a Zoom call, because some people, can't just get on with their work for the rest of the day or whatever it happens to be. But there's a connection there where we're talking about, what we're getting done and what we're working on, what the barriers are. And those barriers can include, I'm having a hard time right now. And as evidenced by, I burst into tears in a meeting yesterday because I'm just super overwhelmed. And that's okay. And so creating space for people to be their whole selves and bring all of that into work, because this is what we're all going through right now. So I think so much of I feel so badly for people that work in organizations where they can't talk about all the stuff that's hard about this, or they feel like I can't go hang out with my kids at lunchtime, or just go play with them right now because that's what they need this afternoon, because the kids are stressed too. And we have to find ways to work differently and be differently, quite frankly, I think, again, to get through all of this.
Yeah, and maybe not even just to get through it all, but to establish what the new normal is going to be. I think it would be a shame for things to go back to the way they used to be, because there were a lot of, bullshit jobs that probably didn't need to exist. That could be done away with if we had something like universal basic income. There were a lot of people having to leave their house and sit in a box for a designated amount of hours to be seen to be doing something or seen to be productive, when that maybe wasn't best serving their job or their potential. And there was a lot of risk, that any day where it wasn't a snow day and people had to commute in not ideal conditions rather than just being able to work from home. These are all things that could be established, or the fact that we could hit our carbon emission targets, or that we could have closer to a zero waste lifestyle by just being more localized, because we don't have to be out of our house for so long. And that enables us to, there's all these things that I used to contract out that now I have to do. And it's inconvenient because now that means I have a shorter workday. But it's also kind of nice that when we get to the end of the week, all the vegetables got eaten in the vegetable drawer, because we couldn't rely on all of the other conveniences that we usually do, where then we're just left with a vegetable drawer that's been neglected all week because we didn't cook anything. And so I think, there are nice things, and there's sort of optimistic potentialities that, for what could come out of this. And I was wondering, in terms of how you would advise organizations that can't pivot but realize now they've gone through 3 weeks and now they realize it's not going back, and what are they going to do? What would be your advice to an organization that's trying to shift how people work and when people work?
I think the things that we are seeing right now, and I think the advice that we're giving organizations right now that we work with is like, if you didn't have a strong set of values and a culture around the way that you worked, if you didn't have strong teams before, this really makes that all evident in a completely different way. Like, I feel like everything about what is happening in this moment is amplifying everything, things that are good and things that are bad. And so organizations where they didn't have, again, a strong culture or strong relationships between team members, it's really hard to now not see people and not be in the same physical space, because they don't have trust with each other necessarily, or they don't know how to communicate with each other, or they can't be vulnerable about being in a bad place for a couple of days because they're just finding it overwhelming, or a loved one's sick, or whatever is going on. So I actually think that one of the best things organizations can do right now is actually invest in relationships in their teams and their culture, and try to find ways to create more connection points between people that aren't meetings about things, but are actually about people connecting with each other. And so things like doing a daily huddle, where you're just talking about what happened yesterday, what you're doing today, and you're just sharing a little bit about maybe how you're feeling, is really powerful for people to know where people are at. Scheduling social time, like we're doing an hour of social time. It's a Zoom call. We all have a beer, and we get to sit outside now that it's getting warmer, just to have that. And then we just talk about whatever. And it's not about work. It's about relationships, and it's about culture, and it's about making sure that we feel connected to each other. And I think that is one of the best things organizations can do. Because if people don't feel like a team, they can't take on the new work, or they can't figure out how they're going to overcome the communication barriers or whatever the problem is that they're trying to solve.
Yeah, and it's interesting, this organizational communication issue, because it's often so problematic in large organizations, that there are people sending inappropriate or not unnecessary emails, having the meeting that should have been an email, and not often being that great with the face-to-face interpersonal communication, which ironically, now that people are having to do their work in a Zoom meeting context, is where face-to-face interpersonal communication skills are suddenly being renewed as something that people actually need to be quite good at. And how that can be maybe a sticking point, and maybe part of this issue with agility, the number of communication channels that you have to go through to be able to pivot your organization, to be able to do something productive or regain your productivity. The communication channels can become barriers to actually getting things done. And so as much as you're recommending more communication, it's a specific kind of communication, and it's kind of a specific kind of communication that cuts through the bullshit in many ways. Like, you just need to be upfront with people about what your challenges are. And in some organizations that's really risky, because if you are honest, it can count against you.
Absolutely. But what we need leaders to do right now is make that okay. We need leaders in organizations to create space for people to work and behave with each other differently. And I don't know if this is a quote or not, so I will suggest that it is. But I believe someone said that it was an Elon Musk, where it was someone who gets asked about the future and how things change, and they said in this interview, I wish I'd stopped getting asked about what changes and get asked instead about what remains the same. Because that is those are the things where we need to actually focus. It isn't actually about how it's changing. So a whole bunch of stuff has changed really rapidly in 3 weeks. What remains the same? Community remains the same. Relationships remain the same. The struggles we were all having balancing our lives before is all the same. It's just that it's visible now in a really different kind of way, because you can't hide that your kid is having a hard time with this because they're joining the Zoom call. And I was doing an interview for a new piece of work, and we're doing the Zoom call and all the things, and the kids are on, and everyone understands it, it's fine, and you can see yourself. And so I see these little hands. I knew my kid was behind me, Margot, and then her little hands came up over onto my chest from behind. But it was great, and it was this really lovely little moment of laughter, and she came and sat in my lap when I finished this pitch for this work, and it was all. But I mean, she existed before she was visible, and so now she's actually part of this in a different kind of way. And so we need leaders in organizations to make it okay for people to have their kids visible in meetings, and recognize that people aren't okay, and to get people to invest in each other in a different kind of way, because that's always what's been important.
Yeah, and I think when this first started happening, I was really, because I am invested very much in my community and in art and culture in my community, and those are sort of the first things that were affected in terms of places closing down, things that you can't access. And I was really worried that all of that cultural and community growth that I had seen in my neighborhood over the past sort of 8 years when I've lived here, I was worried that it could be lost. And actually what has happened is people are coming out in force. You can see that people crave that community. They're still finding ways to engage with it, and in sort of very creative ways, like the putting messages in your windows, sidewalk chalk messages. People are still supporting community organizations and trying to find creative ways to do that. And so I was really happy that that's what I've seen in my community, and I'm hopeful that that when this is all over, that people will remember how scary it was when they thought that they could lose those things. And so that's sort of what I hope will come out of this, is that people will have a renewed engagement for that love of their community that was, when it was taken away, people were so frustrated, and they immediately found creative ways to reestablish it under these new conditions. And I'm just wondering what your optimistic thing that you now have in this moment, or see in this moment, that you'd like to have continue to be the case if we get out of this, when this is all over.
I think I think of some of what we were just talking about. Like I really hope that you really start to question why we work 9 to 5. Why do we work 5 days a week? Why was it so hard to find balance before? Not that it's balanced now necessarily, but we suddenly can work differently, and or some of us can suddenly work differently. And some of these rules that we thought had to govern the way that we do all of this stuff suddenly don't seem to matter anymore. And so I just hope that the best parts of this, and the things that we are learning from this, because it is happening to all of us, that we all decide to make it different and make it better moving forward.
Well, thanks so much for chatting with me, Brock. It's been a delight, and I hope we have you back on Midtown Radio in the coming weeks.
Yeah, please do. I would love to. Thanks so much.
So you're listening to Midtown Radio. That was my conversation with Brock Hart from Overlap Associates.